Listen, I get it. You're a man and you know you have potential. You know that you're meant for more. You know there's this version of you inside that's the real version of you if you can just let it out. But the difference is the reality and your vision sometimes doesn't match. Or maybe you feel like you're not fully embodying that version of you. And by the way, this can happen at all levels. Some people that I know, they're to other people, they're living a 10 out of 10 life. But to them internally, to their own standards, they know they're secretly holding themselves back. They know they have more in the tank. So whether you're in a really, really tough situation and you want to turn it around, or things are going really, really well, but you want to upgrade your mindset to not hold yourself back anymore from reaching a new level, we've got something for you. But here's the thing. In both of those cases, I know it's not because you're not doing the work. Especially if you're here. If you're on this page or you're watching this video, I can guarantee you that you're doing the work. You have probably been to a bunch of seminars, you've read tons of books, you listen to podcasts, you're investing in yourself in all sorts of ways, trying to change your beliefs and your mindset. So I don't think it's any of that. But I think a very common problem that most men face these days is despite doing all the work, despite knowing what to do, and then actually doing it consistently is like two different things. And it can get frustrating, can it? It's two steps forward, one step back, or even worse, you start really, really strong and then you self-sabotage yourself and you can't figure out why you keep doing that. And it's only natural because we're human. If this goes on for a long enough period of time, maybe it's something you're not doing. Maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the real issue. I don't think it's because you're not doing the work. I don't think it's that you're not dedicated or you're not working hard enough. It's not that you don't have the right resources because with the internet and I guarantee you probably either have the right information, you have the right mindset, the right idea, and you've most likely come across the right strategy. I believe everybody's doing the best they can with what they got. If you have a dream, if you have a vision, if you know who you're really meant to be, why would you stop yourself from doing that? There's no reason why you wouldn't unless there was something in the unconscious mind that was holding you back. And the real challenge is you have an unconscious autopilot that's running the show, that's telling you a story that you didn't even choose. You ever see a hot air balloon before? Where it's got the basket, it's got the balloon, and when it's on the ground, what does it do? It's tethered by a bunch of ropes and it's like stakes in the ground and it's got a bunch of sandbags, right? And so what most people are trying to do is they're trying to burn that fire, trying to get more motivated and trying to push the balloon up in the air with just pure thrust, right? But it's not going anywhere. Why? Because you're still tethered into the stakes in the ground and you got all the sandbags of all your past baggage. Whenever you have a goal and whenever you're sideswiping yourself or you're self-sabotaging yourself, it's always because there's a misalignment somewhere between consciously what you want and unconsciously what you're moving away from. And they always say the biggest fears that people have, men, women, everybody, but the biggest fears in humanity is the fear of not being loved and the fear that you're not enough. Well, I think for men, there's a third fear. It's the fear of not fully reaching your full potential. But I think the real fear that most men face is they're not reaching their full potential, but then also knowing deep down that it was you that held yourself back at some level. I hear men all the time, they say, hey, there's a version of me that I know is the real me if I could just let it out. Well, what that really means is they know there's a version of them that's free from their conditioning. That's the real version of them that's fully expressed without all the limitations from the past. And so what we want to do first is cut the stakes off the ground, cut the ropes off, and then you chop off all the sandbags one by one, and then you start to lift up, you start to rise. You can get so much further faster if you just resolve the internal conflicts that are holding you back. You can change the unconscious autopilot. It doesn't have to take years. It doesn't have to take decades. It can happen in a couple of hours or a few days if you know where to look and if you know how the brain works, if you understand the process. Because this is coming from personal experience. Everything I share with you, I'm not teaching from theory. I'm not teaching from this is what somebody else taught me. This is all real, practical, tested, down-to-earth knowledge. This all comes from experience, and I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I haven't done or haven't experienced myself. As a matter of fact, like it was so important for me to be able to have walked my own talk that I didn't even put myself out there as a coach. I flat out refused to until I personally solved the problems that I was facing that most men face, so I could feel like I had the integrity to turn around and help other people. Does that make sense? And so what I want to share with you is a few years ago, this was me. This was me to a T. You wouldn't have recognized me. I was 80 pounds overweight. I was six figures in debt. I had lost my business. And at one point, I was married to my college sweetheart. She was struggling through some massive addiction problems, and I was a people pleaser. So I'm trying to save her, and it deteriorated the marriage to no end. And I'm stress eating like crazy. So my weight's getting even worse. And at my worst, I end up broke. I end up depressed. I end up massively overweight. I'm divorced. And then I'm living in my parents' condo because I had no place to stay. They didn't live there, but they had an over 65 community, or they had a condo I could live at. But what I was going to share with you, the retirement community, I had to live hiding from an 80-year-old woman because I wasn't 65, because I wasn't old enough to technically live there without parental supervision. You know how crazy that is, especially for a guy. I was successful. I had a six-figure business. I was doing well at one point in my life, right? I had it all, and I had self-sabotaged it. Or if I hadn't self-sabotaged it, my unconscious autopilot told me, oh, you deserve to be in this type of relationship, or you deserve to have this guy not pay you. Do you know what I mean? Like I either self-sabotaged or I allowed it to happen to me. That was the problem. And I remember, you ever have this night where it's like they call it the dark night of the soul, where it's like something's got to change now. No one's coming to save you. And it's like you're at a crossroads. It's either you fix this now or there's no fixing this. You ever been there before? It's because of just straight up necessity. I had to. It was either figure this out or don't. But there's always these two different versions of you. And I'm just like many of you, I knew that I had potential. I knew this version of me existed out there somewhere. And I'm like, you can either choose to take the action now and make it happen, or you can look back in 6 months or a year from now and be in the same situation or worse. And your friends are going to be like, well, what the hell happened to that guy? And that was so painful for me that I refused to do that. And I had to figure it out. But I started asking myself some questions that night. And the answer to those questions is the foundation of the three keys I'm going to share with you today. And there are three keys to help you rewire your unconscious autopilot to become the man that you're really meant to be. And this is the exact process that I reverse engineered from what I did to myself that night at 3 a.m. And that what literally that night I transformed. It took me a few hours and I transformed. And within the next, 6 months to 12 months after that, I completely lost the weight. I got in the best shape since college. I got out of debt completely, and I started making six figures annually again, year over year, and it's been growing ever since. I've transformed how I personally show up in relationships where I'm not a people pleaser anymore. I'm grounded, I'm rooted, I'm masculine, I'm strong, but I still lead with my heart. And that affects how the woman in my life reacts to me too. Does that make sense? Because it's all polarity. Your external world is a mirror to your internal world. And what I found is if you handle the internal first, the results start to happen naturally. And that's the foundation of everything I teach. There was a famous quote by the artist Michelangelo. And he goes, how did you make the statue of David? He goes, simple. I took the marble and I got rid of everything that wasn't David. Your success, it's not about doing more, banging your head against the wall. It's not about trying to reframe yourself consciously. It's not about trying to force and push and do it through pure force of will. But you can get so much further faster simply by aligning with who you are, simply by getting rid of all the stuff that's holding you back. And that's what I did. That's what the clients that I work with have done. That's what's gotten them the results that they're getting. And by the way, you don't have to be massively in debt like I was, or you don't have to be having a massive, massive problem. I spoke with somebody, he's worth $30 million, and he's trying to get to $50 million. And he tells me, he goes, the reason why I want help is because I know the version of me that got me to 30 million is not going to get me to 50 million, right? And the smartest people in the world know they have to constantly up level their mindset. I had huge respect for him. So here we go. The three keys to help you rewire your unconscious autopilot and step into the man that you're meant to be. So key number one, there's an unconscious autopilot running the show, and it's running your life, and it's holding you back from really being able to be who you're meant to be, do what you're meant to do, have what you want to have. And until you consciously get a hold of it, it's going to be very difficult to sustain success long term. You're going to be fighting against yourself. Carl Jung, he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it's going to control your life, and you're going to call it fate. So this unconscious autopilot is driving the show. And so what you hear in psychology is the only thing holding people back from being who they're meant to be or doing what they're meant to do is the story they're telling themselves about what? About why they can't have the thing. We all know that. But here's the trick. Here's the key. It's not the story you're telling yourself consciously. You could write yourself a new story. You could do a journal prompt. You could tell yourself consciously, no, this is my story. It's not the story you're telling yourself consciously. It's the story you're telling yourself unconsciously that's been repeating over and over and over again. And here's the kicker. You didn't even consciously choose the story. And it's all the stuff from the past. It's your upbringing. It's what your parents taught you. It's the location you grew up in. It's the peer group you surround yourself in. It's what you watched on TV. It's when you asked the first girl out when you were 5 years old and she told you, I like you as a friend, not a boyfriend. And you were convinced that no woman would ever like you again. And you were a people pleaser after that, right? It's all these small things, and it's running the show unconsciously. And until you get a hold of that, right? It's going to keep holding you back. Well, your unconscious has all of these things trying to keep you safe, trying to avoid pain, trying to avoid embarrassment, trying to avoid, asking the girl out, getting rejected, all those things. And because it's trying to help you, the things that you want, your unconscious is pulling you back and making you avoid it. And it's totally counterintuitive. So we want to figure out how do we get in control of the unconscious autopilot and rewire it so it's working for you rather than against you. And when you do that, I promise you, I'm speaking from firsthand experience, your progress becomes so much easier. Not because you don't have to do the work, not because you don't have to do stuff and put the effort in, but because when you do put the effort in, you don't self-sabotage anymore. You don't stop yourself. You're not fighting against yourself anymore. And how much more effective would you be if you just, number one, did what you knew, executed on it, didn't have any story in your head holding yourself back, and you didn't self-sabotage? How much more further in life would you get if that was the case? It's like you would finally get you would finally get the results naturally of the effort that you've been putting in. So key number one is you got an unconscious autopilot running the show. And what we want to do is get that to work for you rather than against you. Now, so key number two is the fastest way to success isn't to do more stuff, isn't to do more habits or actions or morning routines, isn't even to consciously push and force. But the fastest way to get results is to get rid of all the unconscious stuff and all the roadblocks holding you back in the first place, all of the internal conflicts. You want to do that first. And so here's the modern way that especially most men tackle problems, because we're men, we like to hit stuff head on, we like to make stuff work. We like to be like, hey, you know what? That's not bothering us. Let's go. Let's move forward. We have that drive and ambition. The problem with that, though, is even though it's well intentioned, it's like you're pushing a boulder up a hill. And I'm a big fan of working smarter, not harder. There's this dog, it was on YouTube or something years ago, and he's in a cage, and he's trying to get out of the cage, and he's barking like crazy. He's barking, he's like growling, he's like really trying to get out of this cage. And then the camera pans back, and then there's a door right there to his right. And he didn't even see it because he's so focused on moving forward. He didn't know there was a solution to his problem right there. And it would have been so much easier. We don't want to be like that dog that's barking at the cage and doesn't realize there's an exit there or there's an easier way. And so what we do, what the model of achievement is these days is we set a goal, we fire ourselves up for it, we try to get super amped, and we just start driving forward and taking action, or we start learning a bunch of stuff and taking action on that. And it's great. But how many times have you tried that before, started and then stopped, and then started and then self-sabotage yourself, and then start and stop, and it goes on like that for a while? That's why New Year's resolutions, they say it's something like 80% of people fail their New Year's resolutions by February. And not even by February, by the second week in January, but they say February. 80% of people. Why does that happen? Because setting a giant goal, getting yourself amped up for it, and taking action for it, but with a bunch of internal conflicts, it self-sabotages your results. It doesn't sustain long term. So we want to take that, and the action's important, the goal setting is important, all that's important, but we want to sequence it right. So what we want to do first is we want to identify what's the root cause of all the internal conflicts. Where does it come from? And when you find that stuff out, we want to get rid of it as fast as possible. Here's a great metaphor. We talked about the hot air balloon before. Another one I heard, it's like you have a jetpack attached to your back and you're trying to push forward, like thrust forward, but you get an anchor attached to your ankle and it's stuck in the ground. And so you'll go forward, but then it pulls you right back and you can't go much further, or you get yanked all the way back to where you started from. The better way to do that is before you push forward, you chop off the ankle weight, you chop off the anchor, and then it's like there's a slingshot effect, or there's nothing holding you back. There's no more resistance. Does that make sense? So what we want to do is we want to figure out what's the internal root cause of all the stuff holding you back, the inner conflicts, a part of me wants to, but a part of me doesn't. I consciously want it, but my unconscious is trying to protect me from it. If we can get to the root cause of all that and align the inner conflicts, like I told you, your external world is a reflection of your internal world. So if we clean up the inside first, the results become so much easier. Does that make sense? Every result that I got in my life, losing over 80 pounds, getting out of massive debt, making six figures again in revenue, and then in my business, turning my relationships around, it wasn't achieved by more skills and more books and more doing things. I had to do that stuff. Like I had to, if I didn't understand because of the way society is, if I didn't understand what not being a people pleaser was, but being like a rooted man was, I had to read about that, right? But it wasn't the reading that changed it. What changed all of that for me was continuously going internal, getting rid of the blocks. And then when the blocks went away, it's like you're underwater and then you let go of whatever's holding you down, you float to the surface, or like the hot air balloon thing, right? When you get rid of what's tethering you, progress becomes so much easier, so much more simple. So key number one is the unconscious autopilot's running the show, and then key number two is we want to get rid of all of that unconscious stuff, all the inner conflicts that's preventing you in the first place. You follow so far? Okay, great. So now finally, key number three is if you take those things, if one and two are true, number three is it doesn't have to take months or years or even decades to make a change. You can transform and you can shift this internal autopilot, this unconscious autopilot, and become the man you're meant to be in a really short amount of time, in a matter of hours, really, if you know where to look and you know how the brain works and you know the process. We're conditioned to think that, it takes a while to get rid of something. It takes a while to make a change or a transformation. Like it's going to be painstaking. We got to put the work in. It's like a real conscious thing. And that would be true if change was a conscious process. But what I understand is all learning, all behavior, all change actually is an unconscious process. And so if you reverse engineer what the brain already knows how to do, you can get results in hours or a couple of days as opposed to months, years, or decades. Here's what I mean. Let's take something like a phobia, for example. When a phobia happens, how fast can a phobia get installed, right? Like it's one moment, one instant, one time something happens and it was intense enough, and all of a sudden the person has a lifetime fear of whatever, a phobia happens in a second. And then, psychology goes on to say, well, that's going to take 20 years to get rid of, and exposure therapy and years and years and years. But the interesting thing is, if you really think of the mechanics of how it works, you can get rid of it just as fast as you got it. Your brain can unlearn something just as fast as it can learn something. And I'll prove it to you. Has there ever been a time where you were convinced something was real when you were younger? Whether it's a belief, whether it's something that you held on to dearly, whether it was a thought and an ideology, maybe it was a relationship you thought you'd never get over. Maybe it's something as simple as, the tooth fairy, something like you're convinced the tooth fairy is real when you're 3, and then you're 7, or if you're 20 like me, then you finally figure it out. I'm kidding. But no, like it's a tooth fairy, and then you get some evidence. What happens? You get a little bit of evidence. You get an aha moment, you get an epiphany, you get a little bit more experience, or there's something that shifts your perception of it. And instantly, that old belief, it goes away. It's like it was like it never goes back to the way it was before. Have you ever had one of those things before? It happens all the time. The brain does this naturally. So it can learn things and it can unlearn things just as fast as it installs the phobia. And if you know how the brain works, what you can actually do is you can use the brain's natural unconscious mechanism to get rid of decades of limiting beliefs, limiting emotions, fear, anger, sadness, fear, guilt, shame, all of the internal conflicts. you can get to the root cause of that, get a new epiphany, and it's like I told you before, it's like you wake up from the dream. And you can literally, in the course of a couple hours or a few days, completely have a new identity of how you relate to yourself. And it's incredibly powerful and it's incredibly possible. And I'm living proof of it because I shared with you, I would never tell you something that I haven't personally done myself or that hasn't worked for countless other of my clients. So it's like electricity. Right now, you don't have to know how it works because that's not your job. That's mine to figure that out. But I'm promising you, like there is a way to rapidly transform that unconscious autopilot if you know where to look and if you know the process. Okay, so those are the three keys. Number one is we want to make sure, first of all, you got an unconscious autopilot. We want to get in front of that and start to steer it in our direction to work for us rather than against us. Key number two is we want to make sure that instead of just pushing forward, we get rid of the roadblocks first to make success so much easier, right? It's like then the road is clear. And number three, it doesn't have to take decades to make a change or to make this transformation. You don't have to bang your head against the wall like with no hope and hope that someday it changes. You can change in a few hours or a few days if you know how it works and if you just reverse engineer what the brain can do naturally. Now, I shared with you, it was 3 a.m. that night. Things weren't going well for me. But the thing is, just like so many of you guys, I knew that that version of me existed. I knew he existed. And I knew that the decisions that I made today, everything in my life was because of either a decision I was making or a decision I was failing to make. And I go, well, why would I not make the decisions that are best suited for me? And I'm like, well, it's just because of all the conditioning. It's all the stuff holding me back. It's fear. It's assumptions. It's who I believe I am. It's all my conditioning from the past. And I asked myself, I go, how much longer are you willing to settle for not being the man that you know you're truly capable of? How much longer are you willing to put up with it? How much longer are you willing to make excuses to yourself about why you're not really where you should be? And I'm like, you're already where you are now. You've already at this level of life. This is the age that you're at. You're not getting any younger. And I saw it very, very clearly. I was like, there's that version of you that it's the real you if you just do what you know, if you just get out of your own way. Or what's going to happen is 6 months from now, you're going to look back and realize, like, man, I'm in the same spot I'm in now. The finances didn't get any better. The relationships, what relationships, right? I did not want to be the guy that came to the end of his life and people were like, he had all the potential in the world. Why didn't he live it? Whatever happened to that guy? And that was so painful for me that I'm like, I got to figure this out right now. And that's what led me to create what it is that I created here. And I want to help you with this. And so I know that's true for you too. I know just like me, there's that version of you that exists that is living your full potential. There's an alternate timeline, alternate universe out there right now where that guy does exist. And it's the decisions that you make now that are going to help you get one step closer to there. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite you. I've done something special. I've opened up a couple of one-on-one 15-minute intro call spots where I'm going to talk with you personally, and we're going to figure out what's the root cause of what's been holding you back. We're going to find out what's the unconscious autopilot that you're running and how can we rewire that so it's working for you rather than against you. And we'll have a nice conversation. If it feels like a fit, I'll share with you how we can work together and how we can actually make this happen where it's a long-term lasting change that lasts for the long run. It will rewire how you relate to yourself. It will rewire your results. It's truly transformational. And here's the thing, worst case scenario, it's a 15-minute call. We have a great conversation. You learn some stuff. You get a couple of aha moments, distinctions. We part ways as friends. It's all good. Or the more likely scenario is it's something that's truly transformational for you and it changes your life. And we're looking back 6 months, a year from now, and you're like, you are thanking yourself for the decisions that you made today. Because I experience that every day in my life. And I experience that when I've worked with clients now, I've done this with over 100 people. And there are people that come back to me a year later, a year and a half later, 2 years later now at this point, and they're saying the things that we did that day, the stuff that we got rid of, the way that we re-sculpted how my unconscious is working, it's still paying dividends today. And it's been mind-blowing. It's truly humbling to be able to help people in that way. And so I think the real worst case scenario is I told you before, until you make the unconscious conscious, it's going to run your life and you're going to call it fate. I think the real worst case scenario is knowing all of this, allowing your unconscious mind to still just run the show, is doing nothing at all. and letting time go by and you not really reaching your full potential, not because you can't, but because at some level there was something deep in you that you're not even really aware of that's holding you back. So I would love to serve you with this. One of the things I did when I figured this out for myself, I promised, I said, if I figure this out, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to help as many people as I can with this. And I want to deliver on that promise. So I've opened up a couple of 15-minute intro call spots. It's me. So we're going to talk one-on-one. The spots are incredibly limited. I do talk to everybody and I want to have the conversation with you, but book them now before they go because they're going to be limited. And I look forward to chatting with you. So let's chat one on one. Let's get this handled. Let's get this figured out. And let's help you step into the man that you're meant to be and get your unconscious working for you rather than against you. Take care. See you.